So I did my project on the history of the Lowell Mill Girls. The Lowell Mill started up in 1823, and the city Lowell itself was named after Francis Cabot Lowell, and he was a huge figure during the Industrial Revolution, which was going on while the mills were being built. And since the Merrimack River runs through Lowell, it's the perfect place to have water-powered mills, which is why Lowell was such a big mill city. How did the mills operate? The mills were run by men, and they employed girls from ages 15 to 30 years old because at that time they didn't really have a lot of money to be paying male workers, and females didn't have job opportunities, so they just decided to hire younger females who they could use and basically pay not a lot of money to get a lot of labor, and that way they would make more money and make more mills and just like repeat the process over again. And the girls who lived at the mills lived in boarding houses. They had long work hours and low pay because they were women, and women didn't have equal rights at that time. The mills were operated by the water from the river, and they produced high quality cloth. And the machines themselves weren't hard to learn how to operate, but they required a lot of labor, and sometimes it was tough, especially for younger girls, and they got hurt while working there. And the job itself was really repetitive and dull. Why the mill girls were working at the mills. So, most of the girls who worked there were widows, and they were trying to help financially support their families because either they wanted money for education or they really didn't have like a purpose in their family, I guess, because they couldn't get another job and they just wanted to help support their family. So, yeah, some of the girls who worked there wanted money for education because some of them wanted to learn how to read and write, and some of them already knew how to read and write, which I'll talk about later. And some of them, at that time, there was no other job opportunities for them, so when they saw this job opportunity, they felt like a sense of freedom and they could finally be away from their family. So working at the mills sounded like a great opportunity for them. And men didn't work at the mills because of the low pay. They could just find any other easy job and work there instead of the mills. The conditions of the mills, the rooms themselves were very crowded, and they they were very, very loud, like the rooms themselves, because the machines were really loud. So the girls went deaf because of that sometimes, because it was just like the loud sound. And some girls even got hurt working there. Their work days averaged 12 hours, and this averages out to 80 hours of work a week, and that's 2 times more than the average work per week today. And they only made $3 to $4 a week. They worked 5 full days, Monday through Friday. They worked half of Saturday. They had no work on Sunday, but they attended church. So they were basically doing the same things together, which they started to form bonds because of that, because they would spend every single day together. And again, their work was very repetitive, but it was simple, but it was boring and dull. And the girls, like, their work days were horrible. A lot of them, the girls who knew how to write would write journals about it and stuff like that because they wanted the public to hear their work conditions and their horrible work days, and they really had no other way to do it. How the mill girls were a community. So, as like spending so much time together and having the same job and coming kind of from the same place at like similar places at home, the girls started forming bonds. So one of the factors that factors in is they're all around the same age, 15 to 30 years old. There were some younger workers, but this was just the average. Most of them were women from farms or small villages, so they could relate on that. They all lived in the boarding houses together, so they saw each other every single day. They slept with each other, they ate meals with each other, they had the same workday schedules. So the close proximity and spending all that time together brought them together. And so basically, when new farm village girls would come, the city girls would, the experienced city girls would come to help them, and like they would teach them the ways so they could fit in better, and that formed bonds too. And all those factors were the reason why they started forming this community. So what came from the community? So basically, since they formed these bonds, they started to talk about stuff, and they started to talk about how they should like do something about it because this is just not fair for them. So they started to work against their employers because they didn't like their their low pay, long work hours, bad conditions. So they formed protests, and this had never been seen in history before because this was before all the women's rights movement stuff started happening. So they were basically the ones who started up the women's rights movement. So that was really significant to it because they showed women that they can fight for their freedom, and they can have a say in the community. And they showed a lot of women what freedom feels like. And they fought for a long time. There was a lot of significant figures in in the in their protests, especially women who knew how to read and write. They helped out a lot, and some of them knew how to read and write, and without them there wouldn't be so much, we wouldn't know so much about the history of this, because they would write journals and they would post the journals publicly, and that helped a lot. So the girls fought for a long time, but they didn't really see any lasting effects because whenever they tried, nothing would come of it. But they didn't see any effects at that time. There were definitely lasting effects that were later seen in the future and helped other women see like what it feels like to fight for freedom. The significance of the Lowell Mills and the Mill Girls. So in the past, obviously they started off the women's rights movement, and this was the first time it had been seen in American history, obviously. They got through the protests, they got one thing that was like an effect at that time. They got their work hours cut because of it, but they kept trying again and again, trying to get higher pay. That didn't work. So eventually it kind of faded out, and the Lowell Mills started overproducing fabric anyways, so that kind of died out too. And the Industrial Revolution was happening during that time, so without the girls working there, the mills wouldn't have been so successful because they made a lot of money from it. So yeah. And obviously they shaped how Lowell is, because Lowell started up because of the mills. And present day, there's a museum in Lowell today, and I think it's called the Boot Cotton Mills Museum, and it just kind of has the history on the mill girls and the mills, and it has a weave room, which is really cool, and it kind of like shows you how it feels to be a girl working there at that time, because it's really like you walk in the room and it's really loud, and all the machines are really crowded and stuff. And another significance of the Lowell Mill Girls is they changed the history of the women's rights movements, and without them, maybe it wouldn't have started off so early, but I don't know. Yeah. So that's it.